Parental alienation. Apparently, there are people out there that want you to believe it's a pseudo-science. Well, I'm sorry, I don't think so, and here's why I believe this. First of all, there was nothing pseudo about the abuse my daughter and I experienced. But if you choose not to believe me and doubt every word I'm saying, I suggest you carry on and you listen on to what I'm going to say. But bear with me. Every International Women's Day, Jess Phillips MP reads out a list of the names of all the women who have been killed by men in the UK since the last International Women's Day. The list is always heart-wrenching, and rightly it needs to be addressed, so kudos to Jess for that. However, what about the children who have been killed at the hands of a parent or a carer? I'm sorry, but there's nothing pseudo about any of these deaths, the women or the children. When Victoria Colombe was murdered, I've been teaching for 12 years. Her death caused shockwaves throughout all frontline agencies. And the publication, Every Child Matters, was meant to be a game changer, protecting children from harm so that atrocities like this would never, ever happen again. But a few years later, there were more deaths. Baby P caught the public attention again. So there were further initiatives to stop tragedies like this happening. Yet 22 years later, here we are, and we're still hearing about the most horrific stories. Star Hobson, Logan Magwani, just to name two. I've been trawling through the internet, and I've found over 130 children who have been murdered at the hands of their primary carer. And what's awful is I'm sure I haven't exhausted this list, though I really do wish I had. Something isn't being done, which puts these children directly in harm's way. As I made the last video, their smiling faces were etched on my mind. It was awful. These children, they appear so happy. And I couldn't help thinking that many of these photos were probably taken by their eventual killer. These children trusted this person because this was their parent. So it begs the question, what are we missing? As I was doing this, my husband shared this picture with me. And I believe there is an important analogy here. Just as aircraft were sent into battle, divorce can often seem like a battlefield too, and our children are caught in it. This diagram maps all the bullet holes that World War II fighter planes would return to base with. The Allies initially thought to strengthen the most commonly damaged parts of the planes to increase their combat survivability, but this didn't work. There was a mathematician, Abraham Wald, who pointed out that perhaps the reason certain areas of the planes weren't covered in bullet holes was because the planes that were shot in certain critical places could not return. This insight led to the armour being reinforced on the parts of the returning planes where there were no bullet holes. This shows that the reason we are missing certain data may be more meaningful than the available data itself. So the moral of this story is don't only listen to what the evidence says. Also, listen to what is not being said. So, let's get back to that original question. What isn't being said? What are we missing? If we only listen to the children who stay with their possibly abusive resident parent, we will only get the stories of the ones that survived the initial divorce. What about the children that were alienated? Their story can only be told years later when they realise that they have been grossly manipulated by their parent. Wonderful women like Amanda Sillars, Crystal Shivers, Petra, Deeter have all spoken out widely about their experience as alienated children and campaign widely to raise awareness of parental alienation. And then there are so many more children, but understandably, even years after the alienation, speaking out is hard. There will be regret, anger, resentment, and a relationship with a parent that they once trusted implicitly during their childhood, but is now in jeopardy if they speak out. We shouldn't underestimate the hold that this has over them. But what about the children who didn't survive? Victoria, Star, and Archie, just to name 3. Are these the children that we are also missing? Attachment theory explains children smiling and pleasing their caregiver is their survival behaviour that children are hardwired for. If they please the person who provides love, they in turn will protect them. In the mind of a child, pleasing their primary caregiver is vital, since their very survival depends on it. Even when children are older and at school, they know they have to return to the home of their primary caregiver, and if that home is abusive, the child will go out of their way to please those responsible for their care. It could be argued that it's a little like Stockholm Syndrome, but the assailant is their very own parent. And as a survivor of domestic abuse, I know I walked on eggshells placating my abuser. A child is no different. You quickly learn that the tiniest thing could trigger an incident. Lord Laming's report on Victoria's death mentioned during her time in hospital that she was described as a little ray of sunshine. How could she seem so happy when she had suffered such awful abuse at the hands of her aunt? I read the Wikipedia entry that suggests that dynamic maturation model, DMM, of attachment and adaptation is a way that we can explain this. Its developer, Patrica Crittenden, commented that while the Laming report pointed out that the telltale signs had been missed, the signs were very present and noticed, but tragically, their meaning was not understood. Misinterpreted attachment behaviour signs can cause professionals to be more easily and unwittingly recruited into a disturbed parent's story of what happened to the child. Crittenden uses Victoria's case as a good case example of a false positive effect, or FPA. It describes the use of inappropriate positive affect when negative effects would be far more appropriate. An example is the overbright smiling or laughing in the context of present danger or while actually experiencing pain. The overtly compliant child, too, can be missed. Dr. Steve Miller has also advocated that parental alienation is counterintuitive, and I'm going to leave links to that below. So, if we take Abraham Wald's advice, what can we learn from these children? First of all, first impressions can be deceptive. Just because a child appears happy doesn't mean that everything is well within the family. Schools, GPs, health visitors probably have a better handle on what home life is potentially like, and their views should not be dismissed when social workers and cath workers become involved. Worryingly, if these frontline workers are not educated to understand the counterintuitive nature of this abuse and the false positive outcomes on children, how will they be able to spot the overly compliant child? Or know that they should question whatever the resident parent is suggesting that has contributed to the change in that child's behaviour, especially when the resident parent appears to be so plausible and charming. If what they say is contrary to the wider family, alarm bells should be going off. If the wider family is cut out altogether from the child's life, serious concerns should be raised and they should be investigated. Questioning facts that are laid out before us shouldn't give us anything to fear if we have the child's interests at heart. Moreover, it should direct the vital support where it is needed to avoid the tragedies these children have suffered. Another red flag is a change in the children's family circumstances. These children were often killed after one of the parents had decided to move on with their life. The Varma children were killed because Mum had asked for a divorce. The young children died because Dad had an unresolved issue from his past. His mother and his grandmother had both died in quick succession, and he was denied access to his daughter from a previous relationship. The boy's mother had allowed him almost unrestricted access as he appeared to dote on the boys, and they probably loved him as a result. But when Mum became pregnant with a new partner, that was the last straw for Dad. In the weeks leading up to the killings, Dad repeatedly made threats to family and friends that he planned to commit suicide and, worse still, take the boys with him. And then he did. The Rigi family is another case. Before she was married, Teresa Rigi, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that, had a history of eating disorders. The children had all been conceived through IVF, so they were much wanted. However, the marriage had broken down. In the next 4 years, the custody of the children increasingly became an issue for Mum. She was incredibly protective. Dad had moved on and had a new partner. Against Dad's wishes, she decided to homeschool the children. Dr. Brenda Robson, an independent chartered child psychologist involved in their case, said at the time that the children had little or no peer contact and perceived school and the outside world as frightening, threatening, unsafe places. They would arrive at Dad's with GPS trackers and mobile phones. Rigi's defence counsel, Donald Finlay, one of the country's most experienced QCs, admitted he had never come across a tragedy quite like it. He said, Teresa Rigi is not evil. She is not wicked. She is not a monster. If it is possible to love one's children too much, she loved them too much. They were part of her, and she was part of them. The thought of being separated from them was too much. What she needed was help to move on with her life. The children appeared happy and lacking for nothing, and were well cared for by her, which is why their story is so shocking. Another could not be predicted case was that of the Mulmohi children, Yolanda and Theo. Mum was trying to move on with her life without their abusive father. Dad had discovered this and sent messages to the men she had been dating online. Just 24 hours before the murder, he contacted one of these men and told them to stay away from her. Even in the last video they made with their dad, the children were smiling as they said, "Bye-bye, Mummy." They trusted their daddy. Then little Chloe Sutherland. Mum often presented with a good facade and did not express to any care professionals any thoughts of harm to herself or her children. This gave unfounded reassurance to those who were in contact with her. Yet she had a history of postnatal depression. As I look at these cases, the agencies involved often say, this is a tragic case, and our first and foremost thoughts must be for the family involved. And yet, before awful tragedy occurs, wider families are excluded from the discussion. Star Hobson, her family tried to warn the authorities, but they were ignored. Archie Sprigg. Archie was killed by his mother on the day of a custody hearing, and yet they repeatedly dismissed Dad's concerns. Logan Wangi. His dad said after Logan's death, "For the past 5 years, I have been struggling and trying to fight to see Logan. All I've wanted to do was just be a dad." A month before Logan was killed, Social workers in Bridgend removed him from the Child Protection Register. His estranged, but I would argue alienated father never even knew he was on the register. How can this happen in this day and age? What is going on in their mind that makes them think that killing a child, the child that they are responsible, is the answer? That killing that child is in the best interest of the child? This is why we need HCPC registered forensic and clinical psychologists who fully understand the dynamics of attachment and parental alienation, so we can get inside the mind of potential killers and their victims. This is why those who push the idea that parental alienation is a pseudo-science is so very dangerous. They are not protecting children at all. In fact, they are putting them at further risk. This begs the question, who are the pseudoscientists? I'm just saying, this has got to stop. We need to protect our children from parents whose minds are beginning to stray from what is in the best interests of the child.